Chair. Thank you for being here today. Congratulations on your appointment.
Thank you, Senator.
Being in a highly complex job with affecting so many people's lives and livelihoods.
The question at the end, not the beginning.
I feel a great deal of responsibility, Senator.
Thank you. Inflation has gone from 7.8% peak to 5.4%. In your speech yesterday, you went on record to say the Reserve Bank would not hesitate to raise rates again if it looks like inflation is not coming under control. Is inflation coming under control? I'm guessing so far from your comments that you're wary and there are signs that it's not.
I'd say what I said earlier, which is that we got an important piece of information yesterday. We need to take that away and analyse it and figure out what it means for our forecast going forward. No different comments than we've been making to date, which is that we are wary is a good word. We're looking at some of the more persistent parts of inflation and asking ourselves, are there signs that those might be coming down in the future? So, yes, we are wary, and we don't know if the job is done yet, and we've made that very clear. Even though we haven't raised interest rates since our last interest rate rise in June, we've made it very clear that we might need to go again. We had not ruled that out, and we're in the same position.
When debating the need for a rate rise, is the effect on mortgage affordability, especially mortgage stress, taken into account? And if so, what measure do you use? And what is that measure telling you about how hard life is getting for mortgagees?
So we do understand that there is a distribution, and well, let me step back for one moment. Higher interest rates and monetary policy work through a number of channels. The one that gets the most attention is what we call the cash flow channel, which is the impact on people who have debt. And that gets a lot of attention, particularly in Australia, because, as Chris already mentioned, most of the debt of households and businesses is variable rate debt or very short fixed rate debt. So that's why that channel gets the most attention. But there are other channels. In fact, Chris gave a speech on it fairly recently. One is the intertemporal channel, which basically means as interest rates go up, people are incentivised to save rather than to spend. And in fact, we are observing that. And there is an incentive for, we are still seeing people in aggregate save, and there's an incentive even for mortgage holders to save because their interest rates have gone up. So for them, there's an incentive now to try and put even more away into their offset and redraw accounts if they can. So that's the other way that it works. Another channel is the exchange rate channel, which, if you think about the way that works, is as interest rates rise, the exchange rate, if everyone else wasn't raising their interest rates, the exchange rate would rise, but at the moment it means that it hasn't fallen very much, so it's sort of been reasonably stable over the last year. So we're not getting inflation through that particular channel. So there's other channels as well.
So you measure these?
Do we measure?
Do we measure?
We can't be very precise and measure we can't very precisely say particular channels contribute X to inflation. We can't do it that way, but they're all the channels that we're watching and trying to understand how they might impact.
How do you assess whether or not people are under mortgage stress?
Well, we don't do individual mortgage stress assessments. What we can observe is we can observe data we get from the banks on hardship calls that they've got, arrears rates, those sorts of things, so we can observe those at aggregate level. And the feedback we're getting at the moment from the banks and from the data we see is that that's risen, but it's still at very low levels.
Okay, thank you.
Last question.
Surely the inflation that's still hitting Australians has something to do with the Reserve Bank creating $500 billion out of thin air, or as Dr. DeBell said, electronic journal entries. That was over COVID. Have you thought about that? Your predecessor admitted it was a cause of the inflation problem, creating that $500 million out of thin air.
So basically you're referring to the massive expansionary monetary policy that we undertook during the pandemic.
Yes.
And I think my response would be that at the time we were facing a very, very dire economic situation, and the appropriate response at the time was to run a very expansionary monetary policy. We have now unwound that and we're in tightening phase. So yes, the purpose of the expansionary monetary policy was in fact to basically give demand, encourage demand and encourage growth. That was very much the intention. The extent to which now we look back and say, well, demand is too strong, yes, now we are in tightening phase to wind that back. So, but I wouldn't say it was the sole reason for the increase in inflation. You also might remember that there was very big supply chain issues as well, and when constrained supply meets high demand, inflation.
So just building on that, you have a very blunt tool to attack inflation, don't you? Because the cash rate for the entire country is a very blunt tool to try to bring down inflation.
Yes, it's a blunt tool.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator.